Hello again. I have another great episode for you. I am so blessed to have the most amazing guests. And Elizabeth is the guest today, Elizabeth Rosenberg. Her PR person, reached out to me and asked if she could be on the podcast. And, I loved her story and I was like, sure, she looks like a good fit. And so I didn't know anything about Elizabeth until we got on this interview. And she is the founder of the Good Advice Company, a marketing and communications consultancy that coaches agencies, brands, and C suite leaders on global messaging strategies, brand positioning, and thought leadership. So she has a very diverse background in the corporate world, and she now has stepped into a new role of having her own business. She had one before, but this is something brand new. She started in the midst of the pandemic, and she's just really lit up about what she's doing and how she's helping people with purpose. Very similar to what I do, but in a different way. She's helping people like CEOs, CFOs, and CMOs, and all those like in very high executive ranks people. And she had her own journey, which she shares and talks about, where she ended up in the emergency room because she was basically worked herself to a collapse. And as she says, rock bottom. So we talk about that. And it actually during the episode, I was like, oh my gosh, I had this memory of something very similar happening to me. So you have to listen to hear, but it's a really great episode. I mean, the time whizzed by, and that means it was a very good and engaging conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get on to it, and you can meet Elizabeth. Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Lives. And I have with me today Elizabeth Rosenberg, and she is the founder of the Good Advice Company. And I just have to tell you, she is so like flexible because she didn't know we were going to be on video, and I do video. So it's a good lesson for me to like make sure people know. But she is like just a la naturelle, and her kitchen's in the background. It's so cute. And she's so cute. So welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me. I mean, I think one of the things that we've learned in the last 18 months is to pivot. We're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine.
That's
And
right.
I
And there
talk a
might be
lot.
a naked husband running behind, or a
I
toddler
would love
stroller.
if a naked husband was running behind me. That would mean that there was someone here. Um,
Uh,
no, I think that I talk a lot about being our authentic selves. So you are getting me curly hair up in a ponytail, sweater on, tiny kitchen in the background. So this is who
that's
I
how
am.
I
So
that's how I roll too. I got my
yeah,
t-shirt. I just finished walking my dog. So
yeah, perfect.
thank God for Zoom lipstick, right?
I know I needed to add some. I should do that next time.
I always forget to put it on. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can do it with Zoom. So anyways, yeah. So you have a really great a story that made you pivot though, because of like a trip to the ER. So I
Yes,
don't know where you want to start, but you live in Los Angeles,
I do.
and yeah,
Um,
you're at midlife and you had this thing happen at work, and
I
you were like a go corporate gal, like I was.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm still a go corporate gal. So I think a few things. First of all, I love that you said pivot. Somebody told me the other day that this past year that we should be pirouetting instead of pivoting, and I thought that that was just the best advice I've ever heard. Instead of just
Pirouetting. Oh,
pirouetting instead of pivoting, that we're constantly on this move of change. So I've really kind of like accepted that as a new phrase in my life because I just truly love it so much.
yeah,
um
that garners an image that is,
yeah,
yeah, it's not so
yeah,
serious. Yeah, it's more playful.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
um and I so I ended up in the ER. I was, as you mentioned, my story, my burnout story. It was very traumatic. I was working for one of the best brands in the world that most of us have in our homes. And I was a global head of communications for a very large advertising agency. And I loved my job. And I want to preface that with the story with that. I think a lot of people believe that when you burn out because you are unhappy or because you're working too hard at something that's not bringing you joy. I loved my job. I was traveling around the world. I was meeting amazing people. But I was pushing myself past the point of exhaustion, in all honesty. And we had a really busy day at work, and my body was done. I had a migraine where I lost all of my motor skills. I ended up in the emergency room where they thought that I had either overdosed on drugs or that I was having a stroke.
Could you
Um,
communicate with them?
no,
Oh,
I
and
couldn't
do
say
you
anything.
normally have migraines, or was that like an odd thing?
I've no, I've had migraines since I was 4. I mean, I've seen
Mhm.
everyone, I've done everything. I have a gazillion different triggers, and it's interesting because I'm working on kind of like a side, us
Side hustle?
us us people, we just can't do one job. We have to,
That's
well,
right.
so I have kind of a little side project that I'm working on that's really documenting this wellness journey that I've been on. Because I look back and I look at that burnout as a huge wake up call for me. I mean, it was a point in my life where I was completely like I was just out. I was drained of everything spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, done. And when you hit rock bottom, you only have left to go. So it was kind of a place for me to really lean into different forms of healing. I think that it was funny. I saw this morning there's a cover story in LA Magazine about shamans and microdosing and all of this stuff. And my only advice to everyone is, just like a doctor, make sure you have referrals for all of these people, like I have in my process. But I've done everything from past life regression to allergy shots twice a week. I mean, you really you get to a point where you're like, I will try anything to feel better.
Acupuncture, I presume?
Everything.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I had
yeah,
acupuncture this Tuesday. So you really, and there's no silver bullet. I mean, what I said works for me and what has worked for me
yeah.
is not necessarily going to work for someone else. So I think that's the other thing too, is when you're on the verge or when you've hit corporate burnout and everybody says to you, oh my God, you have to try this. This is what's going to save you. It gives you a glimmer of hope. But if it doesn't work, it actually just makes you feel worse because you're like, oh my God, how did this work for someone and not work for me?
Yeah, that's so
So
true. So true.
I think being open on whatever that wellness journey looks like. But the reality is we should all get to a place where we shouldn't burn out. I, while I would love for everyone to never get to the place that I was at, this year I put out my story in Business Insider. I also posted on my Medium, which is Good Advice Co. So people could read it after a certain amount of time. And I've received hundreds of emails and messages from people who have been in the same place, who were just thankful for somebody else telling their story so they could share it with their team members, so they could share it with their bosses. So they had someone else who looked like them that was in a similar place. Because I
Yeah,
think it's very scary to share that. I think it's very scary to acknowledge that you've gotten to that place because there's a lot of guilt around that.
yeah. Yeah, so question that pops in my mind is what would you
Yeah.
have done differently? Because you said, you wish you had known then what you don't, now, but what is it that in particular that you think would have kept you from going to that rock bottom place?
At that time in my life, if someone told me, here are all the things you can do that will make this not happen, I wouldn't have listened.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like I would have been like, that's never going to happen to me. It's fine. It had to happen to me.
Yeah.
So
It
it
sounds
was,
like was the path you were supposed to
it was,
walk.
I truly believe that wherever we are on our journey is where we're supposed to be.
Hmm.
And that you don't really take like a wrong turn in your life path. It's just kind of another lesson that you learn.
Did
Um,
you get advice? Good advice. I love that. So did you get, and I'd like to know where that came from, but like, did you get advice from somebody who that kind of led you down the wrong path, or that you like it didn't work for you and then you were like frustrated? It sounds like you wished you had known that there were more options.
I mean, I think society leads us to very traditional forms of healing. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, there's alternative forms of healing that have definitely not worked for me either. I mean, I did a past life regression and it was like the worst experience of my life.
Oh, wow.
But some people have loved it and it's been amazing and like good for them. I think like traditional therapy wasn't the best form for me. I actually ended up working with kind of a spiritual metaphysical healer. That was an incredible source for me. But I also, allergy shots did help. When I get a migraine, I take migraine medicine. I mean, there is a world where this Eastern and Western and spiritual and physical and all of these things can combine into whatever it is that works for you. There's a lot of things that I wish I had done different. I think that in the corporate setting, you need to be more vocal about what you need in terms of your mental health issues. You're not going to get it unless you ask.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I have a little story. I never talked about this
please.
before on the podcast, but I actually fainted at work. I was in my, it was high stress. I worked at AOL and it was in the like, I think at that point where it was the busy signals where, we couldn't keep up with the scaling of it. And I had a very important job and I was standing in the doorway to my boss's office and he was telling me something and I just literally I hit my head on his door jamb and fainted. And I
That's
was
so scary.
yeah, and I had books in my arm, like my books, and I was taken out in an ambulance and taken to the hospital. Yeah. And it was great. He came to the hospital and it was like, oh, but I'm a fainter. I tend to faint for medical things. Like if I get a
Hmm.
shot, I'm like, oh, that's something new. Like I'm good now. My first mammogram, I fainted at. So, but yeah, I did not ever expect it in just the commonplace day to day. Like it was just my brain going like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the thing that's really interesting about, first of all, I'm sorry that happened to you because that had to have been terrifying. And and in so many ways it's embarrassing because you're like,
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to see me like that. It feels so hard as like a sign of weakness when really it's a sign of, asking for help of like, I just can't do this anymore. And I think too, when things like that happen and you're on a course of burnout, you don't see it until it's too late, until it's too late.
Mhm.
So you kind of need people around you to point it out too. Again, at that age and a few years ago when that happened to me, even if somebody was like, you're gonna burn out, I don't know if I would have listened.
Yeah, and I think in that
Yeah.
moment, honestly, I think my boss was reprimanding me for something like I shouldn't have done, and I
Ah,
think it was just me just, like, shutting down
yeah.
because that never happened to me, like, really. I never had it was just like, "I can't handle this, I can't handle this." Ching. So, yeah.
Well, and
And
that's the
not
other thing
reprimand sounds
too.
bad. I mean, he was just like, it's just like
Yeah.
I was such a perfectionist and such a workaholic that, like, one little itty bitty mistake or, like, you know, correction.
Three into a tailspin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I,
But right
I
back
think
to
that
work. I didn't like nobody I
no.
didn't even, like, look for tools. Right back to work, right back to the grind.
Well, part of my story is when I got home from the hospital, which is about 6 hours after I got there. I mean, I literally I drove myself to the hospital, which was the dumbest thing ever. I mean, I look back on this and I was like, oh my God. And then ended up I like floated into the emergency room. I still like don't really know how I got in. I think I threw my keys at someone. It was just like, and I was hysterically crying and I couldn't really talk and I couldn't tell anybody what was wrong with me. But after I had they finally figured out what was wrong with me and given me medicine and I had calmed down, I came home. And again, the hospital's like 3 blocks from my house, very close. 3 blocks, but like 25 minutes away from work. I looked at my phone and I had like 300 emails, 70 something mixed text messages, and I started working the second I got home. Like didn't even take like the evening to think about what had just happened. Because I was sure that I had, a brain tumor. I was like, obviously there's something medically wrong with me. So that's the other thing too. I think when you do a burnout, the very first thing you want is like for someone to tell you that you're dying, because then it all makes sense instead of something that you've done to yourself.
Yeah, so how long did you continue with that? I mean, if you went home and worked, did you, like, at some point have an epiphany or
It's so funny. You know what? No one has ever asked me that question, and I don't really know. I started to seek kind of alternative treatment probably like a month after it happened when they told me I didn't have anything wrong with me. I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, we need to dive into this because I can't have that happen again." Like it was terrifying and really unbelievably painful, and it was just something I was not interested in re-experiencing. So I needed to get to the bottom of it. And then I think once you start, the second you start on a wellness journey or you start on trying to find out what is the reason why you're doing something and if what you should be doing alternatively, right? Like Is it because I didn't like my job? Is it because I'm working too hard? Is it because my body can't work as fast as my mind? Which I think with really strong independent corporate people, that is the case. Is our brain functionality is running at a 12 when our bodies can run at like an 8.
Yeah.
So I just kind of started, and then I realized that a lot of what I was trying to accomplish was not being asked of me. It was what I was expecting of myself. So once I came to that conclusion, it was like, oh, I should probably get a different job. And it was hard. That transition was hard for me because what I was looking for in my next job was the ability to build a team. So I went from being responsible mostly for about over 300 offices globally to being responsible for 5 offices, but with a team of 14. So,
And so you tell me what was hard about
yeah,
that, because yeah, I had a very similar situation. I was a vice president at AOL, and I was like, I had like 54 people under me. And then, well, no, that actually I was a director in that role. And then I moved into a different department. And yeah, when I was a vice president, I was in the member services, customer service. So I was responsible for like 5,000, customer service reps, but my team was much smaller. But isn't it interesting that society, yeah, the direct reports were less, but the responsibility was more. But society kind of like, we fear, or I don't know what you went through, but like having less people, does that change? Like I had a bigger title, but less direct reports. So how'd you feel when you made that transition? Sounds like
I
you,
it was amazing for me. And I have to say, because I went from 0 help to 14 people, like it was like a game
oh,
changer.
got it. Oh, so you had responsibility. So you kind of like, yeah, you had the
I
responsibility for all
had,
these things. Okay. Got it.
yeah, but I think that the thing that was really interesting to me was that I really realized that I love managing people. And part of the mentoring aspect was something that I was really missing.
Got it.
So I think that's the other thing too, is really finding out what brings you happiness in your job. What brings you, what it was, is it the doing? Is it the executing? Is it the hunting? Is it the writing? Is it the creativity? Is it the strategy? For me, a lot of it was the people managing and having that opportunity to work with so many incredible people, and also give them kind of the people management that I hadn't received in past jobs. I tend to lead with a lot of empathy. Everybody in my team, I make sure I'm aware of their mental health needs and their health needs in general. I have everybody go through their appreciation, or like their love language at work, so I can know how they need to be appreciated. And I hope that, and I say, I've stayed in touch with everybody that I've pretty much almost everybody I've ever mentored or has worked for me.
Well, you're clearly
So
good at it because you have such a caring and really want them to grow in the role, it sounds like, as a
I
person.
mean, thank
Yeah.
you. I mean, those are the best bosses that I've had. So it's
Mhm.
funny because when you asked me how my company name came up, my company was actually named by my mentor.
Hmm.
I was on the
What,
phone with him.
you give good advice or
Yeah, I mean, I was on the phone with him, and I was like, my lawyer's gonna kill me. Like, I gotta name this company. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I've brainstormed with these people, and I'm trying to do this, and he was like, well, you have you're unbelievably strategic. Your intuition is very strong. And he was like, and you just give great advice. He was like, so just call it the Good Advice Company. And I was like, okay, there's no way that's available. And as I'm on the phone with him, I'm sitting right here. I start, going to GoDaddy, and I start Googling, and I was like, oh my God, this is available and this is available and all the socials are available. I'm like, this is a sign from God. So
that's
while I was on the phone with him, I bought all of the handle, or all of the websites, the handles, everything. And he was like, look, if you don't use it, I will. And I sat on it. And like, honestly, the logo creation came up in like 2 weeks. Like, it then just like all happened really fast.
so when,
So
at what point did you decide to start the Good Advice Company?
I actually quit my job on March 2nd of 2020. I was just ready for a change. I am a very entrepreneurial person. And having been in PR and marketing for so long, I was really ready to start kind of living as my authentic self, and really stop being the voice behind a company and start being the voice for myself. So now I strategically advise C-suite leaders, brands, startups on their brand positioning,
And just in
marketing,
case the listeners
communications.
don't know, because I don't know how many corporate people we have, but C-suite is like CFO, CEO, CMO, chief marketing, chief, executive, and
Correct.
chief technical off. Yeah, all that, all those people with C roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, I started to talk about society and labels. So it sounds like, I was trying to get to the point that like our identity is so wrapped up in our title. Yeah. And so I would love your perspective on that because, you were saying before we hit record about how, it's the person. It's never about the title. I remember when I left my corporate job, I was like, what am I going to say to people because every time I say I'm a vice president, they're all like, "Ooh, where do you work?" And and when now it's like, "Oh, I have an online business and I have a podcast," and they're more interested that I have a podcast, honestly, than the fact that I'm a
mhm.
coach or that I have a program that I help people change their lives. Uh,
I know you're doing major work there. It's interesting. I think that COVID has a lot, and the last 2 years have had a really big impact on me in terms of watching people leave jobs. I know that we're in the middle of the great resignation right now, and seeing people really look for purpose and look for point in what they're doing. And it was when I left my job, I knew very clearly what I didn't want to do, but I was really struggling to find out what it was exactly that I wanted to do. And even in the last 18 months, what my offering is as a consultant has pirouetted a little bit and has changed a little bit as I'm finding different needs for people in the industry. But the one thing I think I saw the most of was when people were passing away. I mean, there were, obviously unbelievably talented executives and just everyday people who were passing away, and their obituaries were reading like resumes. And I'm like, oh my God, if I die tomorrow and my obituary says that I worked on this, and this, but doesn't say anything about the fact that I am an empathetic leader, the fact that I am helping amplify the voices of those who cannot be heard, the fact that I'm helping people find their purpose in life, I'll be really bummed.
Yeah, what is it about the role that they played? What is it that
Yeah.
that made them have meaning in their life and make a difference in life? That is
Yeah.
so true.
I
Yeah.
mean, what
Maybe
is
maybe
your
one day,
legacy?
yeah, maybe one day
Yeah.
we'll have a new style of obituary. Maybe that dynamic can change. Wouldn't that
I
be
mean,
great?
wouldn't that be amazing? Because in all honesty, like it's just such a disservice to who you are as a human to be defined by your career. And I think it's interesting because I think that when we get on Zooms or when you walk into a room, they're like, this is Lori. She works at AOL. And you're like,
Mhm.
oh, okay. I have, a company that validates you. Or that, they say to me, like, this is Elizabeth. She worked with, Apple and the NFL and General Mills. And it was like, okay, so you know those companies, which means that I'm a good person and I'm good at my job. Instead of me coming onto a Zoom and saying, like, this is Elizabeth, she is an entrepreneur. She, is an avid stress walker. I mean, there's so many other things that you could say about me that would introduce me in like a really kind of like funny and fun way. But I
Yeah,
don't
and
think we're there yet.
yeah, what would people say if you just say, I am one of 1 billion sperm cells that actually made it to Earth.
Right? Success. I mean, like, look at you. Good job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I was an accident, so that even like when I found that out, it was like, I had to do some soul searching there. Yeah, so one of the things you said, which I'm very curious about, is that you said that there is a work purpose and a life purpose, and they can be different. And so, can you explain what the difference is? Love to hear about that.
I think it's different for everyone. Um, I think that our life purpose can be tied, can align with our business purpose. I know that as a communicator, and I've been a communicator my entire life. I am a twin for pretty much like the first 18 years of our life. I spoke for the two of us. I don't know if she'd agree with that now. And I so easily made a career in PR where I spent most of my career telling the stories of others and story mining the stories of others, right? Really pulling out what was important about them and sharing that with other people. And I do believe that so much of my career purpose over the last 20 years has really been to amplify the voices of those who are not heard and to share those stories that are not being told. I've also, I've worked in a corporate environment where I've amplified the stories of people who their story was already out there, and it is what it is. And we all need to
Sure.
it's part
Yeah.
of life, right?
Yeah.
But I think as I'm now in this chapter in my life, I'm really honing in on what my purpose is. And I'm still kind of like fine tuning that as well, right? It changes according to where you are. But I think part of what I really want to share with people is, again, amplifying that voice, but really trying to help people find their purpose.
Mm. Yeah.
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 That's interesting. So you're saying that I had that purpose for a career,
Yeah.
and now,
hmm
but are you working on them simultaneously because you're left
I,
that career, or are you still doing some of that work and then you have a larger, like, more
I,
intrinsic purpose that you're working
yeah,
on?
I'm still doing a lot of that work. Obviously, that's what it's what I love to do.
Yeah.
But I'm finding really it's interesting because I'm finding that as I'm helping people kind of uncover their professional purpose, and again, it can be like a great example is someone who really wants to hone in on, bringing women's sports into the world and making women's sports a better place and a safer, more equitable environment for people to be in. Now, that can be your purpose professionally, but professionally, you can also be an amazing brand builder. You can be an amazing marketer. You can do all these other things that you're passionate about. But if you're really honing in on that purpose, I found that when you share that, it leads to this authenticity that everyone else is so much like, it's just more relatable.
Mm.
It makes you feel, I think, like you're making a really specific impact. And I think it just makes people understand where you're coming from more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think personally, it really, your purpose can be to raise really incredible children. Your
Mm.
purpose can be to impact the world in a sustainable way
Mhm.
by sharing your thoughts on the environment. I mean, like it doesn't, but that world purpose can always ladder up to what you do. You can
Yeah.
bring that world purpose into your everyday career so easily. I just don't think a lot of people do it because they're scared that they'll be seen as kind of like a little woo-woo-y or a little, bringing too much personality really into their professional life.
Mm.
I think it's
Yeah.
time for us to really kind of mix those worlds together.
Yes, yes. So, so true. Yeah. And, I would love to hear what you think about this because, over time, as, I've evolved and as I've helped people, I think, kind of, I don't want to say every season has a purpose. I think there's multiple purposes. I loved being a mom so much, but I was also a corporate person and there were aspects of my job that I really loved, but I love what I do now. So, but I think they all if you are happy in what you're doing, whether it's work or personal activity, there has to be underlying meaning that is of value to you, that brings you a deeper sense of like having a meaningful life, like what you're doing serves a deeper purpose. And so I think you have to know what you
hmm
love to do, which sounds like you really have nailed, and then you can like, put it out in very different ways.
And I think when you're really doing what you love to do, it doesn't feel as hard of work. Do you know what I mean? And it also leads to like greater abundance financially, greater abundance of, love, greater
Yes.
abundance of acceptance, greater abundance of happiness, kind of all of that stuff. And I
Yeah.
know I sound very kind of like woo as I'm talking about this, but I've experienced it. So it's been pretty amazing to kind of like watch it all happen,
Yeah, I've
you know?
met a lot of people who are very misaligned with what they're doing, which what kind of brings them joy and lights them up,
Yeah.
and yeah, they don't even realize they're that was me in some of my jobs, miserable, very
Yeah.
misaligned. I had the same title, but what is it, the aspect of those jobs that I was doing? And so, yeah, so interesting. Yeah. So was that scary to leave or were you ready? Did you have prep to leave?
Yeah. So the best advice that I can give if you're planning on leaving a job is to obviously like have a financial cushion if possible. It was very weird. I mean, about 6 weeks before I planned on leaving, I was vision boarding. Again, I thank Oprah for that. And
Yes,
I
I learned so
was
much from
like,
Oprah.
I know. She's on my vision board. I found a design that was done by a designer named Craig Ward, and it said, "Quit your job, you'll be fine." And I cut it out and I put it in a frame and I stared at it every day. And when I left, yes, it was unbelievably terrifying. And then we hit a pandemic 2 weeks later, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to work for a while. This is going to be rough." And thankfully, the network that I have created and the business model that I've created was something that was in dire need during the pandemic. I'm very, very fortunate for that. But I'm also, I feel really good about the choices that I made. Now, when you do quit your business or quit your job and to start a business, I mean, there's a whole different level of stress when you're an entrepreneur that you're just not ever like you're ever ready for it. This is my second foray into having a company. I've done it much better this time. The first time, I don't think financially I did it all that well. This time I'm doing it much better. Um, but know what you know what you don't know. Ask for help. I think that's the biggest thing too, is I must have reached out to people on LinkedIn for months, asking for, like, who's a great bookkeeper, who would be good at social, who would be. I know what I know, and I know what I'm good at, and I also know, like, what I definitely am not good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting
Or what
help on
takes
that
you
front,
away from the important activities of a CEO,
yes,
right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So so I have to tell you something. So this
Please.
is like crazy that I mean, I thought of this morning, but I forgot about it. Today, October 21st, 2 years ago, is the day I decided to leave my corporate job. And I was at a business conference, and on the way home, I wrote the letter to my boss that I was going to quit. And what the one thing that was the deciding factor was when I got this download that said to me, by not quitting, you're sending the message that this is kind of iffy. You're not, jumping and knowing the net will be there. You're not having faith. You're a
Yeah.
non-believer essentially. If you can't, and I had plenty of, money to lean on, but when, you have a six-figure job and you have like a lot of like, fun trips and all that kind of stuff, you always go to the place where it's like, oh, worst case scenario, right? Yeah. So yeah,
Well,
it's so crazy that we're
congratulations.
talking about this, and it just happens to be like
You're,
my quit anniversary.
well, thank you for sharing that with
Yeah,
this special day with me.
yeah,
Um, it is really, there is so much fear of leaping. And we make so much up of that, like in our heads, of that there will just be nothing. I mean, the reality is, I've always, like, I guess I could, I mean, I'd be happy as a barista at Starbucks if I needed to be.
yeah, yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like, I
yeah,
think that there are always options, especially people who love to work. I think that there are great jobs out there. But I also think, again, you need to really find out what it is that you love to do. I mean, the fact that you have pirouetted into a podcast and a coaching business, and I mean, that says a lot to who you are, your network, your character, and that there is always kind of a second, another chance. I mean, I've changed my career so many times. I've fundamentally always been a storyteller, but I've been in business. I've worked for Norman Lear. I have worked in nonprofits. I've worked in music. Like, I've worked all over the place, but my job in essence is the same thing.
yeah. It's kind of nice. It's almost when I hear that, it makes me feel, because what you're doing now is you're helping people in all varieties, and
Hmm.
you've had all varieties. So isn't that interesting how
Yeah.
that was
That's so
needed?
funny. I didn't
Kind
think
of like,
about that. That's so
yeah,
true. Yeah.
yeah. Have you always lived in LA?
I am fifth generation Californian.
Mm.
And I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I lived in San Francisco for a few years. But yes, for the most part, I've always lived in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I'm an East Coast girl, so West Coast is I can't
There you go.
imagine watching football at 10 o'clock in the morning, but I guess you get
Oh,
used
it's
to it.
so nice. I know. I always think about that. I'm like,
Bloody
oh my God,
Marys
they have
on
to stay.
Sunday, I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, they have to stay up till midnight to watch the baseball game. That's
I
crazy.
know, so
Yeah.
unfair. So anyways, all right. So let's wrap up, and thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I could go on and on with you, and so I'm so thankful that you are here. So yeah, what does living a not your average life mean to you, and how do you exemplify that?
Living not your average life, I think, means living without fear and taking chances. So I feel like that's pretty much been me for the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I so agree. I think, it's you're just settling for average when you let fear drive your decisions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Such a
Thank
great
you.
way to end it. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Not Your Average Lives podcast. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe on iTunes if you have an Apple device. You can find free resources and learn what else I have going on at the moment that might interest you on my website at notyouraveragegrandma.com. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook at Not Your Average Grandma. If you liked this episode, it would make my heart so happy if you could leave me a 5-star rating. You can also add a review to let me know what you like about this podcast, which will help spread the word about it to others who need a little midlife inspiration. As always, be you, listen to your inner voice, and focus on reigniting that lost spark so you can start living your own, not your average life.